I've had many rainy days in my life, but today the sky over Rapid City is especially gloomy. I look out the window of my small fourth-floor apartment, and the raindrops seem like tears that the sky is shedding instead of me. I'm 72, and I learned to stop crying a long time ago. My name is Rivers Price. It's funny how my name is associated with rivers, and sometimes I think my whole life is a long course from one shore to the other, with rapids, whirlpools, and quiet backwaters. Now I am closer to the mouth, where the river becomes calmer but also murkier and bleaker. Carefully, so as not to disturb my aching knee, I sit down in a shabby chair and pick up an old photograph in a wooden frame. A beautiful woman with wheat hair and clear eyes stares back at me. My Allison. It's been 3 years since she left, but sometimes I think I can still smell her perfume in the room, hear her quiet laughter from the kitchen. We met when I was just starting my career in the crime lab. A young forensic scientist with burning eyes and ambition, I was sure I could make the world a little fairer. Allison worked in the archives of the police department, and her desk was at the end of the long hallway I walked past every morning. I noticed that she always came to work 13 minutes early, and every time she stopped at the coffee machine to buy a small cup of Americano and a chocolate chip cookie. One day I mustered up the courage to buy her coffee myself. She raised her eyebrows in surprise but accepted the treat. 6 months later, we were married in a small church on the outskirts of Rapid City, and another year later, Cedric, our only son, was born. I return the picture to the nightstand and sigh heavily. Cedric. If Allison had been alive, maybe things would have turned out differently. She was always able to smooth things over, to find the right words to reconcile us when my son and I couldn't agree. Cedric grew up a smart boy, but he was always a little distant, immersed in his own thoughts. As a child, he could spend hours assembling elaborate constructors with no distractions. Allison said he'd inherited my methodical nature and attention to detail, but I'd noticed something that bothered him too, a cold calculation and lack of empathy. When he saw a crying child in the park, he never showed sympathy, only curiosity, as if he were observing an interesting biological phenomenon. Allison and I tried to develop sensitivity in him, enrolling him in various clubs where he could socialize with his peers. But Cedric always kept to himself. He was only interested in numbers and facts. When he turned 14, he said that he wanted to work in the financial sector, because there you can make the most money. The years went by. I continued to work in the crime lab, Allison worked in archives, and Cedric went to a prestigious university to study economics and finance. He rarely came home, even on holidays, always finding excuses, either to study for exams or to meet with his classmates. When he did come home, he spent most of his time at his laptop or on the phone. His eyes lit up only when money or career prospects were at stake. He spoke with admiration about his teachers, who had shares in large companies, drove expensive cars, and lived in mansions. After graduating with honors, Cedric took a job at one of Rapid City's major financial firms. He quickly moved up the career ladder and soon became a financial analyst with a good salary and prospects. It was then that he met Temperance, a tall, slender girl with dark hair and shrewd eyes. She worked in the same company in customer relations. I liked Temperance from the first time I met her. She was sincere and warm, qualities my son lacked. When they announced their engagement, I was overjoyed. It seemed to me that Temperance could soften Cedric's character, teach him to appreciate the simple pleasures of life. It was then that I made a decision that now, looking back, seems to me a fatal mistake. I offered to give the newlyweds our family home, a spacious 2-story mansion with a garden, which Allison and I bought early in my career and paid off over the years. The house needed repairs, but it was solid and cozy, with a large kitchen where Allison loved to cook Sunday lunches, a terrace where we had tea on warm summer evenings, and an apple orchard that I had so carefully cultivated. Allison objected at first, saying we could help them with a down payment on their own place, but I was adamant. I wanted Cedric and Temperance to start married life in a house where we were happy, where every room held our memories. Plus, I was nearing retirement, and a big house required too much energy and money to maintain. Allison and I moved into a small apartment in a high-rise near the center of town. 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a small kitchen, just enough for 2 not-so-old people. Allison had tried to make our new place cozy, hanging pictures, arranging plants, but I could see how much she missed her big kitchen, the garden where her favorite peonies bloomed every spring. Cedric and Temperance moved into our house after we were married. At first, they often invited us over for dinner, and Temperance asked Allison for advice on gardening and the history of the house. But gradually, the invitations became infrequent and then stopped. When we did visit, I hardly recognized the house. Cedric had undertaken a massive renovation, knocking down several walls to make the space more modern, replacing the old oak parquet I had once laid with my own hands with fancy laminate flooring, removing my office, where I spent my evenings reading forensic literature, and replacing it with a home gym. With each visit, I felt more and more like a stranger in this house. Cedric and Temperance were polite, but I noticed the way the son wrinkled his nose when Allison told stories from the past, the way he rushed us if we stayed longer than usual. When Temperance announced she was pregnant, Allison and I were happy. Our first granddaughter, Allison, immediately began knitting tiny pennies and hats. I planned to make a wooden cradle, but Cedric politely declined my suggestions, saying they had already ordered a modern ergonomic crib made of eco-friendly materials. Evie was born in the spring, in April, when the apple trees in the orchard of our old house were blooming, especially lushly. Allison and I arrived at the hospital with a huge bouquet of flowers and a small silver bracelet that Allison had been picking out for weeks. Temperance was happy to see us, but Cedric seemed tense, constantly glancing at his watch and implying that the young mother needed rest. With Evie's birth, I had hoped that our relationship with my son would improve, that the little granddaughter would be a bridge between us. But the opposite has happened. Cedric became even more distant, rarely bringing Evie to visit us, always finding reasons. Either she was too young to travel, or she was teething, or had a cold. When Evie turned a year old, Allison got sick. At first we thought it was just a common cold, but when she started losing weight and getting weaker, the doctors did a checkup and found late-stage cancer. The next 2 years became an endless series of hospitals, chemotherapy, hopes, and disappointments. Cedric rarely visited his mother, always in a hurry, excusing himself with work and family. I could see the pain in Allison's eyes when he told her he couldn't make it, but she never reproached him, only asked him to show her new pictures of her granddaughter. In the last months of his life, Allison talked about Cedric often, worried that we were estranged from him, that we had missed something in his upbringing. She asked me not to hold a grudge, to understand and forgive him. I promised her that I would do everything I could to keep my family together, that I would be there for Cedric and his family, that I would help raise Evie. Allison left quietly in her sleep, holding my hand. At her funeral, Cedric stood stone-faced, not shedding a tear. Temperance was crying, holding 2-year-old Evie, who didn't understand what was happening, and trying to play with the flowers on her grandmother's grave. After the funeral, Cedric almost stopped communicating with me. Calls became rare, visits even rarer. Temperance called occasionally, talking about Evie, sending pictures, but I felt she was doing it without her husband's knowledge. I tried to establish a relationship with my son, inviting him to dinners, offering to help with Evie, but I always received polite refusals. Gradually, I came to terms with the idea that I had lost not only my wife, but my son as well. Now sitting in my small apartment, I can feel the years and loneliness weighing heavily on me. My pension as a former forensic scientist allows me to pay the rent and buy the essentials, but not much more. I save money on everything so I can occasionally buy gifts for Evie, but rarely have the opportunity to give them in person. Evie is now 5 years old. I've only seen her a few times in the last year, and each encounter has been fleeting. At the park where Temperance would take her for a walk, or outside the early childhood school where I happened to be at the end of class. Evie looks remarkably like Allison, the same wheat hair, the same clear eyes. When I look at her, I feel like a piece of Allison is still alive. Evie always gets excited when she sees me, rushes to hug me, talks about her toys, her friends at daycare, the books they read to her before bedtime. But these encounters are always too short. Temperance glances nervously at her watch, afraid that Cedric will find out about our meetings. She once confessed that Cedric had forbidden her to speak to me, saying I was a bad influence on Evie with my outdated views. Well, perhaps my views are outdated. I still believe that family is the most important thing, that respect for elders is not an empty word, that money should not be the measure of human worth. I still remember the times when neighbors knew each other by name and didn't lock their doors at night. The rain outside the window intensifies, drumming on the eaves like an impatient guest. I rise from my chair to make tea. On the kitchen table is the envelope I received yesterday, an invitation to Evie's birthday party. It's her 6th birthday. I don't know if Cedric sent it or if Temperance secretly sent it to her husband, but I know for sure I won't miss the day. I've already thought of what I'm going to give my granddaughter. A small silver locket that once belonged to Allison. Inside is our family photo taken many years ago when Cedric was just a little boy with an open smile and trusting eyes. I hope this gift will help Evie remember that she not only has parents, but a grandfather who loves her with all his heart. This may be my last chance to be a part of my granddaughter's life. I don't know how Cedric will react to my appearance at the party, but I have to try. For Evie's sake, for the promise I made to Allison. The kettle whistles, bringing me back from the world of memories to reality. I turn off the gas and pour boiling water into a cup of brew. It's getting darker outside, the rain gradually subsiding. Tomorrow is an important day, and I need to get a good night's rest. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow will start a new chapter in my life. The morning of Evie's birthday was unexpectedly clear, as if the weather had decided to give my granddaughter a gift. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, painting intricate patterns on the floor of my modest apartment. I woke up early, long before the alarm clock rang, a habit developed from years of working in a crime lab, where early mornings were often the most productive time. The invitation to the party was on the bedside table, a simple white card with pink balloons and a neat inscription, "Evie Price turns 6. We invite you to celebrate this special day with us." At the bottom was the address I knew by heart and the time, 14 o'clock. I reread the invitation, once again marveling at its existence. Why had Cedric decided to invite me after so many months of silence? Perhaps it was Temperance's initiative. She had always been warmer to me than my own son. Or perhaps Evie herself had asked that grandfather be invited. The thought warmed me from the inside out. Whatever the case, I wasn't going to pass up the chance to see my granddaughter on her special day. Slowly getting out of bed, I made my way to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I noted how much I had aged in recent years. Deep wrinkles furrowed my forehead, gray hair had completely replaced my once dark hair, and there were dark circles under my eyes. I looked exactly as I felt, a tired, lonely old man. After my shower, I shaved thoroughly, making sure not to miss a single gray hair. Then I opened my closet, assessing my meager closet. There wasn't much to choose from, but I settled on the light blue shirt Allison had given me for our last birthday together and navy blue pants. The clothes hung a little on my slimmer body, but they looked neat and festive enough. I had a modest breakfast as usual, oatmeal and tea. Saving money became an integral part of my life after retirement. Forensic scientist is a respected profession, but not a very lucrative one, especially in a small town like Rapid City. My pension was enough to pay my rent, utilities, and basic groceries, but not much more than that. I'd learned to make do with little, but today was a special day, and I allowed myself a small luxury, a fresh croissant I'd bought yesterday at the bakery around the corner. After breakfast, I pulled a small box covered in velvet from a dresser drawer. Inside was a silver locket on a thin chain, a memento of Allison. I opened it carefully. The date of our wedding was engraved on one side, and on the other was a small photograph of the three of us, me, Allison, and little Cedric, smiling, happy, unaware of the trials that lay ahead. I pondered for a long time whether I should give that locket to Evie. It was one of my most precious possessions, my last tangible link to Allison. But isn't that why we keep the memory of our loved ones, to pass it on to the next generation? I imagined how that locket would be kept in Evie's family, passed down to her children and then to her grandchildren. The thought brought me a strange comfort. I carefully wrapped the locket in a soft cloth and placed it in a small gift box I'd bought at the gift store. Then I wrapped the box with pretty pink sequined paper and tied it with a silver ribbon. It was a small gift, but I put my heart into it. There was still a lot of time left before the party, so I decided to walk to the park to get some air and collect my thoughts. It was a warm day, even though the calendar showed the end of fall. The leaves on the trees had already turned yellow and partially fallen, covering the park's paths with a colorful carpet. I walked slowly, leaning on my cane, a consequence of an old knee injury from my days as a police officer. People hurried past, absorbed in their own thoughts and worries. Young mothers were rolling strollers, businessmen in strict suits were concentrating on their phones, teenagers were laughing, looking at their smartphones. No one paid attention to the elderly man in old-fashioned clothes. I sat down on a bench near a small pond, watching the ducks lazily floating on the surface of the water. My thoughts drifted back to Cedric, to how our relationship had changed over the years. When exactly had that rift occurred? Maybe when I retired and stopped being a successful professional in his eyes? Or when I gave him the house and he decided he no longer owed his father anything? Or did it start much earlier, when he was a teenager and for the first time felt ashamed of his father who drove an old car and wore inexpensive clothes? I remembered an incident that happened when Cedric was about 15 years old. I picked him up at school after work. I had a complicated crime scene examination that day, and I was wearing work coveralls stained with chemicals. Cedric came out of school surrounded by friends, saw me, and pretended not to know. I called out to him, and a shadow of irritation and shame ran across his face. He quickly said goodbye to his friends and got into his car, staring silently out the window all the way home. In the evening, I heard him tell his mother that he no longer wanted me to pick him up from school. Over the years, this feeling of shame for his father seems to have only grown stronger. Cedric chose a career in finance, surrounded himself with people for whom status and material well-being were the main values. Next to them, the simple retired forensic scientist seemed a failure, a burden, a reminder of the social status Cedric had strived to overcome. I never judged him for striving for a better life. Isn't that what any parent wants for their child? But what hurt me deeply was that, along with the habits and values of his new environment, Cedric seemed to have completely abandoned his roots, his family, the memory of Allison. The ducks on the pond suddenly stirred. Someone had thrown bread at them. I looked up and saw a young father and his daughter, about 5 years old. The girl clapped her hands happily as the duck swam closer, and her father lifted her in his arms so she could see better. This scene gave me a keen sense of nostalgia. Once upon a time, Cedric and I used to come to this pond to feed the ducks too. He squealed with delight as the birds snatched the bread right out of his little hands. Where did that enthusiastic boy disappear to? When had he been replaced by a cold, calculating man for whom his father was just an annoying reminder of a humble past? I glanced at my watch. It was time to go home to get ready for the party. On the way, I stopped at a small flower store and bought a bouquet of pink tulips. Flowers I remembered from our brief encounters that Evie liked. The bouquet cost more than I could afford, but today was a special day. When I got home, I checked my appearance once more, tucked the gift and bouquet neatly into my bag, and hailed a cab, another unplanned expense. But Cedric's house was quite far away, in an upscale neighborhood on the outskirts of Rapid City, and I didn't want to be late or arrive tired from the long bus ride. As the cab driver drove me through the city, I stared out the window at the houses and streets floating by. Rapid City had changed a lot in the decades I had lived here. There were new shopping centers, tall office buildings, and luxury apartment complexes. But there were some places that remained unchanged. The old park, the town square with the monument to the city's founders, the library where I spent evenings after Allison died. The neighborhood where Cedric lived was the epitome of modern suburbia for the wealthy. The wide streets, the neat lawns, the luxurious houses hidden behind high fences. Our old house, which I had once given to my son, was unrecognizable. Cedric had completely remodeled it, turning a modest family mansion into a palace with columns, an attic, and panoramic windows. The apple orchard I loved so much was gone, replaced by a perfectly level lawn and ornamental shrubs cut in the shape of spheres. I paid the cab driver with a generous tip, another luxury I'd allowed myself today, and walked slowly to the gate. Several expensive cars were already parked out front, and the sounds of music and children's laughter were coming from the house. I took a deep breath, gathering my composure, and pressed the bell button. As I waited for the door to open, my thoughts returned to the incident that had changed my attitude toward my son, made me see him in a whole new light. It happened about a year ago, shortly after Allison's death. I happened to run into Brooks Elliott, a former colleague of mine from the police department who now worked in the financial crimes unit. We got to talking, and Brooks mentioned that they were investigating several financial analysts suspected of manipulating client stocks. He didn't name names, but I could tell from some of the details that it might be about the company where Cedric worked. I didn't think much of it until a few days later, when I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a short note. "Rivers, you might want to know what your son is doing." The note was signed with the initials BE. At home, I looked through the contents of the flash drive. There were files of financial statements, emails, screenshots of bank transactions. I wasn't an expert in finance, but even I could see that the documents showed serious irregularities. Cedric and several other colleagues had systematically manipulated client stocks, buying and selling them at undervalued or inflated prices for personal gain. I was shocked and didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to talk to my son immediately, to warn him of the danger, to try to stop him before it was too late. The other part, the part that had worked in law enforcement for years, knew I had to turn this evidence over to the police. In the end, I did neither. I copied the files to my computer and hid the flash drive in a safe place. I decided that I would keep this evidence in case I ever needed it, either for me or for Cedric. It was a kind of insurance policy, though I didn't know exactly what I wanted to insure myself against. Maybe I hoped that having this evidence would give me some kind of advantage, a chance to bond with my son out of fear of exposure? Or did I just want to be able to protect him if the case went to trial? I didn't know the answers to those questions, but the fact remained that I had evidence of Cedric's criminal activities, and I had kept it secret for almost a year now. The sound of the door opening brought me back to the present. Temperance stood on the threshold, dressed in an elegant ivory dress. Her dark hair was gathered into an elaborate updo, and a pearl necklace glistened around her neck. She looked as flawless as ever, but I noticed the shadows under her eyes, hidden by a layer of makeup and a strained smile. "Rivers," she said with a note of surprise in her voice. "You're here." "Of course," I replied, holding out the bouquet to her. "I would never miss Evie's birthday." Temperance took the flowers, her smile a little warmer. "Thank you, they're beautiful. Please, come in. The guests are already gathering in the garden." She stepped back, letting me into the house, and I stepped across the threshold, feeling my heart begin to beat faster with excitement and anxiety. I didn't know how Cedric would react to my arrival, but I was determined to spend the day with my granddaughter no matter what it took. Inside, the house was even more luxurious than the outside. Marble flooring in the spacious hallway, crystal chandelier, designer furniture, and paintings in expensive frames on the walls. There was no trace of the cozy family nest Allison and I had spent years creating. It looked more like the showroom of an expensive furniture store than a place to live and raise a child. As I followed Temperance through the living room to the terrace, I noticed several silver-framed photographs on the mantelpiece. Cedric and Temperance on their wedding day, Cedric in an expensive suit shaking hands with some important person, Evie in a smart dress. None of the pictures were of me or Allison, as if the history of the Price family had begun with Cedric and Temperance, and everything before them had simply ceased to exist. The thought made me bitter, but I tried to push it away. Today was Evie's day, and I didn't want to overshadow it with my resentments and disappointments. I clutched the gift box tighter in my hand and walked out onto the terrace, ready to meet my son and finally see my favorite granddaughter. The terrace overlooking the backyard was decorated with colorful balloons and garlands. Everywhere were tables covered with white tablecloths with elegant bouquets and decorative unicorn figurines. In the center was a large table with a huge three-tiered cake decorated with sugar flowers and glitter. Professional animators dressed as fairy tale characters entertained the children, and waiters in white gloves served snacks and drinks. I couldn't help but think how different this lavish party was from the modest birthday parties Allison and I had thrown for Cedric. A cake baked by Allison, a few friends, simple games in the yard. It seemed like enough to make us happy. Temperance led me over to a small group of adults standing near the bar. I noticed Cedric right away. He stood out among the guests with his height and confident posture. He was wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit and an expensive watch that glittered on his wrist. He was laughing at something his companion said, holding a glass of amber liquid in his hand. As we approached, Cedric looked up, and his smile vanished instantly. His face was petrified, his eyes narrowed. He apologized to his companions and walked briskly toward us. "What is he doing here?" Cedric asked his wife quietly but with obvious anger, ignoring me as if I were nothing. "You approved the guest list," Temperance answered quietly, but I could hear the tension in her voice. Evie really wanted to see grandfather. "We'll talk about this later," Cedric gritted his teeth, then turned to me, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Father, I wasn't expecting to see you." "I got the invitation," I replied, trying to remain calm. "And of course I couldn't miss Evie's birthday." "Where is she? I'd like to congratulate her." "She's busy with the other kids," Cedric cut him off. "Maybe later." I could see he was lying. Evie wasn't among the kids playing with the animators. She was probably in the house, and Cedric didn't want me to meet her. "I brought her a present," I said, showing the box in my hand. "It's a locket that belonged to your mother." For a moment something flashed in Cedric's eyes. Maybe a memory of the mother he had once loved? But that expression vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Leave them with the rest of the presents." He nodded toward a table littered with beautifully wrapped boxes. "Evie would open them after the cake." I wanted to object, to say that I wanted to present the gift myself, to see the joy in my granddaughter's eyes when she opened the box. But I realized it was useless to argue. Cedric had already turned away, back to his guests, and Temperance was standing next to me with a guilty look on her face. "I'm sorry, Rivers," she said quietly. "He's not in the mood today. Business problems. I'll try to bring Evie to you later." I nodded, grateful for that promise at least. Temperance left me to attend to the other guests, and I was left alone, feeling like a complete stranger at this celebration of life. I walked over to the gift table and placed my little box next to the huge, brightly colored bags and boxes. My modest gift looked as out of place here as I was. Deciding not to draw attention to myself, I stepped aside, found a vacant table in the corner of the terrace, and sat down watching. None of the guests approached me. Perhaps Cedric hadn't introduced me to anyone, and people didn't know who this old man in old-fashioned clothes sitting alone was. About half an hour passed. Waiters were still serving appetizers and drinks. Children were laughing, and adults were making small talk. Cedric was the center of attention, saying something, gesticulating vigorously, and the others listened to him with admiration. He always knew how to impress. Suddenly the front door opened, and a little girl in a lush pink dress ran out onto the terrace. "Evie!" My heart quickened. She'd grown since the last time I'd seen her, her wheat hair braided with pink ribbons longer, but her smile was still the same, open and sincere, just like Allison's. Evie paused, looking around the terrace as if searching for someone. Then her eyes settled on me, and her face lit up with joy. "Grandfather!" she exclaimed and ran across the terrace to me. I rose to meet her, and she literally flew into my arms. I hugged her, feeling the warmth spill over my body. Nothing mattered in that moment, not Cedric's coldness, not the stares, not my own inappropriateness at this party. Evie was happy to see me, and that was the most important thing. "I knew you would come," she said, pulling away and looking at me with shining eyes. "I asked Mom and Dad to invite you, and they promised." "Of course I came," I replied, smiling. "How could I miss my favorite granddaughter's birthday?" "Did you bring me a present?" Evie asked with childlike directness. "Of course I did. It's already on the table with the other presents. You'll open it later, with everyone else." "No, I want it now," she said firmly. Come on, let's go find it." She took my hand and pulled me toward the table of presents. I let her lead me, though I noticed out of the corner of my eye that Cedric was watching us, a look of utter displeasure on his face. Evie quickly found my box among the other gifts. "Is this yours?" she asked, and when I nodded, she began unwrapping the gift without regard for convention. I noticed Cedric walking toward us, but it was too late. Evie opened the box and saw the silver locket. "Oh, it's beautiful," she exclaimed, pulling it out. "Is it for me?" "Yes," I answered, helping her open the locket. "Look, here is a picture of your grandmother, me and your daddy when he was little. This locket belonged to Grandma Allison." Evie scrutinized the picture and then looked up at me. "Daddy's as small as I am," she said with surprise, "and Grandma Allison is very pretty. Do I look like her?" Very much, I confirmed, feeling a lump in my throat. You have her eyes and her smile. Help me put it on, Evie asked, handing me the locket. I carefully fastened the chain around her slender neck. The locket was a little big for a 6-year-old, but Evie didn't seem bothered by it. She touched it proudly with her fingers, as if it were a precious treasure. I will wear it always, she declared triumphantly. Thank you, grandfather. It was at that moment that Cedric reached us. His face was red with anger. Evie, he said in a tone that brooked no objection. Go inside. Mom is looking for you. But I just got here, Evie objected, and I want to be with Grandpa. Look at the locket he gave me. Cedric looked at the locket, and his eyes narrowed. Take it off, he ordered. Take it off at once. But Papa, Evie began, her eyes filling with tears. I said take it off. Cedric raised his voice, drawing the attention of the nearest guests. With trembling hands, Evie undid the chain and handed the locket to her father. Cedric slipped it into his pocket and took his daughter's hand. Go inside, he repeated. Now. Evie gave me a sad look, but she obeyed her father and wandered toward the house. Cedric turned to me, his eyes glittering with rage. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. Coming here as an uninvited guest, giving my daughter this trinket. I was invited, I said calmly, though my insides were seething with anger. And the locket is not a trinket. It belonged to your mother, and she wanted it to stay in the family. My mother is dead, Cedric said coldly. We have no use for her jewelry, and neither do you. I felt the blood rush from my face. It was unbearably painful to hear my own son say that. Cedric, I began, trying to stay calm. Evie was pleased with the gift. It was part of her story, her legacy. Her history begins with me and Temperance, Cedric said. You are a past best forgotten, the old man who was once my father. By now our conversation had caught the attention of most of the guests. They were all looking at us, some with curiosity, others with awkwardness. I noticed Temperance hurrying toward us across the terrace, her face a look of concern. Cedric, don't, she said quietly, coming toward us. Not now, not here. But it was as if Cedric hadn't heard her. Years of latent irritation and contempt had finally burst forth. Look at you, he continued, looking me over from head to toe. Aflanchorny, wearing tattered clothes and taking the bus. It's embarrassing to be seen with you in decent society. I wanted to answer, to defend my honor, but Cedric didn't give me the chance. I've put up with you for years out of respect for my mother, he said, raising his voice so that everyone could surely hear him now. But I've had enough. You don't fit into our lives. You're nothing. Just a beggarly old man who's got the wrong house. He almost shouted the last words. There was dead silence on the terrace. I stood there, stunned by the cruelty of his words, unable to move or say anything. Evie came running out of the house again, apparently having heard the raised voices. She rushed toward me, but Cedric intercepted her, lifting her into his arms. Daddy, let go, she screamed, trying to get away. I want my grandfather. We're leaving, Cedric said, turning to me and ignoring my daughter's protest completely. When we get back, I hope you won't be here. With those words, he turned and headed toward the house, carrying Evie, who was crying. At the door, he turned around and added, And don't you dare go near my daughter again. I forbid you to see her. Then he went into the house and closed the door with a loud bang. I remained standing on the terrace, feeling the stares of dozens of people. No one said a word, as if not knowing how to react to the scene. Temperance looked at me with an expression of deep regret, but she said nothing, only waved her hands helplessly before following her husband. Without a word, I turned and walked toward the exit. The guests parted in front of me, avoiding my gaze. No one tried to stop me, to express sympathy or support. I felt like a leper. Leaving the house, I walked through the streets for a long time, not paying attention to direction. A storm of emotions raged inside me, the pain of betrayal, anger, shame, bitterness. How could my own son do this to me? How could he publicly humiliate me, insult the memory of his mother, deprive me of the opportunity to see my granddaughter? Gradually, shock and pain gave way to cold rage. I remembered the flash drive hidden in my apartment, the evidence of Cedric's criminal activities. I'd kept it all this time, not knowing what to do, hoping our relationship would improve. But today, Cedric showed his true colors. It was time to act. Instead of heading home, I turned toward the downtown business district. There in an old office building was Mortimer Holt, an old friend of mine and an experienced attorney specializing in financial matters. Fortunately, Mortimer was in the office, despite it being a day off. "Rivers, what a surprise. What brings you to me on a Saturday?" I told him everything, about the evidence flash drive, about my ruined relationship with Cedric, about today's incident. Mortimer listened attentively and agreed to help. We agreed that I'd leave a copy of the evidence with him and he'd draw up documents to protect me legally. Back at home, I pulled the flash drive out of the stash and reviewed the files. The evidence was irrefutable. Emails, transactions, falsified reports. I called Cedric and left a message. "We need to talk. It's about your career. Come to my place immediately." Less than an hour later, the doorbell rang. Cedric looked alarmed. "What's the emergency?" he asked, entering uninvited. "What did you mean about my career?" I showed him the files on the computer. His face turned pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "It doesn't matter," I answered. "The important thing is that I have all the evidence of your financial fraud. I think the prosecutor's office will be interested in this material." "Are you blackmailing me?" he squeezed out. "Your own son." "I want justice," I said. "After you humiliated me and took my granddaughter away from me." "Ah, those were just words spoken in haste," Cedric interrupted me, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "I was upset. It had been a stressful day." "No, Cedric, that's exactly what you meant. And not just today. You've treated me like a burden for years, shamed me, alienated me from Evie." "What do you want?" he asked. "Money?" "No. I want to see Evie regularly, without you forbidding it, and I want you to apologize to me publicly." Cedric stared at me for a long moment, then suddenly knelt down. "Please, Father," he said in a trembling voice, "don't do this. If these documents get out, I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation, perhaps my freedom. Temperance will leave. Take Evie. I'll be ruined." I looked at my son kneeling in front of me and felt a strange mixture of emotions. Satisfaction that he'd finally gotten what he deserved, and bitterness that it had come to this. All I ever wanted was to be a part of your life, to see my granddaughter grow up. "Why did you make that impossible?" "I'll make it up to you, I swear," he pleaded, grabbing my hands. "You'll be able to see Evie whenever you want. I'll never say anything bad about you ever again." "I'll give you one chance," I said. "But a copy of these documents is in a safe place, and if you betray me again, the consequences will be irreversible." Cedric nodded, his face a look of relief and gratitude. But in his eyes I could see the undercurrent of anger and fear. I knew that his remorse was not motivated by love, but only by fear of losing everything, and I wondered if that was enough. Cedric was still kneeling before me, his face a look of despair. Never before had I seen my son in such a position, helpless, pleading, lacking the self-assurance that had always been his hallmark. At another time, perhaps the sight would have moved me, would have made me instantly forgive him for everything, but now I felt only cold satisfaction and weariness. "Stand up," I said, taking a step back. "I don't want to see you on your knees. It's humiliating." Cedric rose slowly, his face a mixture of relief and wariness. He still didn't know how this conversation would end, what I would dare to do. "You don't realize what's at stake," he said, sinking into the nearest chair. "If these documents get to the prosecutor's office, I'm not just going to be fired. It's a criminal case, Father." I went into the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, and came back into the room, handing one to Cedric. He took the glass with a trembling hand, took a few sips. I sat across from him, scrutinizing his face. The Allison features I'd sometimes noticed in him when he was a kid were almost gone. There was a stranger sitting in front of me, looking more like a cornered predator than my son. "I've been thinking about what I did wrong for a long time," I began, looking straight into Cedric's eyes. "Where I went wrong in your upbringing. Why you've become so alien, so cold, so calculating. Sometimes I blame myself. Maybe I worked too hard, didn't pay enough attention to you. Sometimes I think it's your high school friends, The environment that shaped your values? Sometimes I think it's just your nature, something that was in you from birth that your mother and I couldn't change. Cedric was silent, his eyes downcast. I don't know if he was really listening or if he was just waiting for me to get to the point, to name my price. But you know what the saddest part is? I continued. I can't remember exactly when we lost touch, when we stopped being a family, when you started to be ashamed of me. I'm not ashamed of you, Cedric countered quickly, but his eyes avoided my gaze. It's just, we have different lives, different social circles. You don't fit into my world and I don't fit into yours. Your world, I grinned bitterly. A world built on lies and fraud. Are you proud of it? Cedric flinched as if struck by a blow. It's not that simple, he muttered. You don't understand how things work in the financial world. Everybody does it. If you don't play by the rules, you get kicked to the curb. Not everybody, I countered. There are people who build their careers honestly, who don't cheat clients, don't manipulate stocks, don't break the law. And where are they? Cedric asked bitterly. At the bottom of the hierarchy, positions with no prospects, in small offices with no future, or already out of business. That's not the way the world works, Father. You've spent your whole life in your crime lab, where everything is black and white, legal and illegal. The real world is different. I shook my head. This conversation didn't make sense. Cedric was always making excuses for his actions, shifting responsibility to circumstances, to the rules of the game. He would never admit that he had simply made the wrong choice. I don't want to argue about morality, I said tiredly. This is about something else. It's about how you took away my ability to see my granddaughter. About how you humiliated me in front of all your guests. About how you took away Evie's gift, the gift that ties her to the memory of her grandmother. Cedric lowered his head. I was wrong, he said quietly. It's been a hard day. I've had problems at work. I snapped. But I didn't mean to hurt you, really. His excuses sounded so fake that I was disgusted. There's always a reason, always an explanation. Never a simple admission of guilt and sincere remorse. Do you know what I've done every Sunday for the last year? I asked, changing the subject. I'd go to the park near your house and sit on a bench, hoping you and Evie would pass by. Sometimes I was lucky enough to catch a glimpse of my granddaughter. A word with her, if Temperance was in a good mood, and would let her come up to me for a few minutes. Sometimes I would just sit there for hours in all kinds of weather and see no one. Do you know what that's like? Sitting in the park like a homeless person, hoping for a chance encounter with your own granddaughter? Now Cedric's eyes were expressing something akin to shame. Maybe he really didn't know about it. Or maybe he did, but he tried not to think about it. I always bought her little gifts, I continued. A book, a doll, ice cream, whatever I could afford on my pension. Sometimes I couldn't give them to her, so they stayed at my house. I have a whole shelf of things I bought for Evie, but never got around to giving. Cedric was silent. What could he say? What excuses did he have for not bringing his daughter to me? That he forbade Temperance to tell me about their plans so I couldn't accidentally be there too? That he just wanted to cut me out of his life as an inconvenient reminder of the past? After your mother died, I said, you almost stopped communicating with me. I called you, you didn't pick up. I wrote messages, and you responded with one-word answers, often days late. I tried to ask you out to dinner. You always found a reason not to. Do you know how much it hurts, being rejected by your own son? I've been busy, Cedric mumbled. Work, family. I just didn't have time. Time, I repeated bitterly. What did you have time for? Receptions where you bragged about your successes to your colleagues? Weekends in expensive hotels? Shopping trips where you spent thousands on designer clothes? But not an hour a month to visit your father. Yeah, Cedric began, but he stopped, unable to find the words. I stood up and walked to the window. It was starting to get dark outside. Evie's birthday was probably coming to an end. I wondered if any of the guests had noticed that the birthday girl had been crying. Did anyone wonder why her grandfather was kicked out of the party? You know what the most ironic thing is? I asked without turning around. The house that has now become a status symbol for you, that you have turned into a palace for your social gatherings, was bought with money that I have been saving all my life. I worked overtime, took extra shifts, denied myself a lot of things to pay the mortgage. And then I just gave it to you because I wanted you and your family to be happy. And how did you thank me for that? I turned around and looked at Cedric. He sat with his head down, as if he couldn't bear to look at me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I really am. I was wrong. Yeah, I'll make it up to you. Are you really sorry? I asked. Or are you just afraid of losing your career, your reputation, your money? Honestly, Cedric, if I didn't have those documents, would you be standing here right now apologizing to me? He didn't answer, and that was more eloquent than any words. I went back to my chair and sat down, looking at my son. All right, I said firmly, here are my terms. First, I want to see Evie regularly. Not in the park, not sneaking around, but normally like a grandfather and granddaughter should. You'll bring her to me every Sunday for a few hours, or I'll come to your house. And no excuses. Cedric nodded. Secondly, I continued, I want you to give me back some of the value of the house I gave you. Not all of it, just enough so I can buy a small apartment and not spend most of my pension on rent. I don't want to live in luxury, I just want a decent place to live in my old age. Cedric nodded again, though something akin to resentment flickered across his face. Money had always been a sore subject with him. Finally, I said, I want you to apologize to me publicly, to the same people you humiliated me in front of. I won't insist on a general meeting, but the next time you meet with anyone who witnessed today's scene, you must explain that you were wrong, that you overreacted, that you respect me and regret what you said. Cedric paused for a moment, but then nodded a third time as well. Is that all? He asked, and I could hear the relief in his voice. I guess he'd expected much harsher demands. Yes, that's it, I confirmed. I'm not going to ruin your career or your family, Cedric. I just want to be a part of my granddaughter's life and have a decent place to live. Nothing more. I'll fulfill all your conditions, Cedric said quickly. Evie will see you regularly. I will transfer the money to your account in the next few days, and I will apologize to everyone who was at the party today, I promise. He spoke too hastily, too easily agreeing to everything. His eyes were not remorseful but calculating. I could see that he was already thinking about how to get out of this situation with as little damage as possible. I hope you realize, I added, that if you violate any of these conditions, if you start ignoring me again or preventing me from communicating with Evie, I won't hesitate. The papers will go to the prosecutor's office the same day. Cedric swallowed. I understand, he said, but that's not going to happen. I will change, Father. I really will. Yeah, I just lost myself in the pursuit of success, of money. I forgot what's really important, but now I realize it. I looked at him and I couldn't believe a word of it. Cedric hadn't changed. He was simply in a situation where it was to his advantage to pretend to be remorseful. Once the threat passed, he would return to his previous behavior. Or worse, he'll start looking for ways to get rid of me and the danger I pose to his career. But for now, I've decided to give him a chance. Not for his sake, but for Evie's. For the chance to be a part of my granddaughter's life, to see her grow up, to tell her about Allison, to pass on family stories and traditions. Okay, I said. I accept your promises. When can I see Evie? Tomorrow, Cedric answered quickly. I'll bring her to you tomorrow morning. She's still upset about what happened today, and she'll be happy to see you. I nodded, my heart warming at the thought of seeing my granddaughter. And about the money, Cedric continued, I'll wire it to your account on Monday. How much do you need? I told him how much I thought it would be enough to buy a small apartment in a good neighborhood. Cedric grimaced but nodded. It's a deal, he said, standing up. I'll be going. I have to get back to the party before the guests leave. I got up too. Tell Evie I love her and look forward to seeing her tomorrow, I said. Cedric nodded but didn't say anything. He headed for the door, then stopped and turned around. Father, he began as if he wanted to add something, but then changed his mind. Thank you for giving me another chance. He left the apartment with those words, and I heard his footsteps moving quickly down the hall. I sank back into my chair, feeling strangely empty. Victory had left a bitter taste in my mouth. Yes, I'd gotten what I wanted, the chance to see Evie, the financial support, the public apology, but the price had been the ultimate destruction of my relationship with Cedric. There was nothing between us now but blackmail on my part and fear on his. No love, no respect, no familial bond. Allison would have been disappointed if she had known what it had come to. She had always believed in the power of family bonds, that love could overcome any disagreement. She would never have approved of what I did. But Allison hadn't seen what Cedric had become after she died. She didn't see how distant he became from me, how ashamed of me in front of his friends and coworkers. I hadn't seen how he'd forbidden me to see Evie, how he'd publicly humiliated me in front of everyone. I went to the window and stared out at the city at night for a long time. The lights in the window seemed like distant stars, unattainable and cold. I thought about seeing Evie tomorrow, about the joy I would feel when I saw her smile again, heard her voice, felt the warmth of her small hands. But somewhere deep inside there was an uneasiness. I didn't believe Cedric. I didn't believe that he was truly repentant, that he would truly change. I could see the underlying anger in his eyes as he agreed to my terms. I saw him mentally calculating how much it would cost him, not in money, but in humiliation, in loss of control. Cedric is not a man who will accept defeat. He would look for a way out, a way to regain control of the situation, and when he finds that way, what then? I turned away from the window and walked slowly to my bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day, the day I'll see Evie. That's all that matters, and I'll deal with the rest when the time comes. After all, I worked in a crime lab for years. I know how criminals operate, how they think, what mistakes they make, and if Cedric decides to turn against me, I'll be ready. As I tucked myself into bed, I remembered the words Allison had often repeated in times of trouble. It's going to be okay, Rivers. Just let time do its thing. I hoped she was right. That time would smooth out the sharp edges, calm the storm of emotions, maybe even repair some of what was broken between Cedric and me. But deep inside, I knew that some wounds were too deep to ever fully heal, and some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. I closed my eyes trying to sleep. Tomorrow I would see Evie. Right now, that was all that mattered. It had been 3 months since the day Cedric knelt before me, begging me not to ruin his career. 3 months of relative peace and a restored relationship with my granddaughter. Every Sunday, Cedric faithfully brought Evie to me, and we spent a few hours together. Sometimes the whole family would come, and Temperance would cook dinner while Evie and I painted or read the books I had bought for these gatherings. Cedric fulfilled another of his promises by transferring enough money to my account to buy a small but cozy apartment in a good neighborhood. I moved in at the beginning of the second month of our truce. 2 rooms, a bright kitchen, a balcony overlooking the park. It was much better than my previous rented apartment. I even set aside one of the rooms especially for Evie. Bought a child's bed, an art table, a shelf with toys and books. Evie was thrilled with her own room at Grandpa's and looked forward to her next visit every time. As for the public apology, here too Cedric kept his word. I was not present during these conversations, but according to Temperance, he explained to his friends and colleagues that he had been wrong, that he had quarreled with his father in a fit of anger and regretted his words. Some of these people then greeted me with obvious curiosity, as if trying to figure out what kind of man this father, whom Cedric Price had once so humiliated and now respectfully introduces as my father, the former forensic scientist, was. On the surface, everything looked perfect. I was once again part of my granddaughter's life, financially independent and publicly recognized for my place in the family. Cedric was polite when we met, interested in my health, sometimes even staying late to have a cup of tea and talk about everyday things. Temperance seemed genuinely pleased to have restored our relationship and often called me to tell me about Evie's accomplishments at school or invite me to a family dinner. But beneath that smooth surface, I could feel the current of dark, cold waters. In Cedric's eyes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw glimmers of underlying anger. In his voice, especially after a glass or 2 of wine at dinner, there was sometimes a note of irritation, even contempt. There was a mechanical compulsion in his actions, in spite of his outward correctness, as if he were performing an unpleasant duty. Once, when Evie and I were painting in her room, I heard Cedric say to Temperance in the kitchen, "I can't stand it much longer. Every time I see a smug face, I want to." He didn't finish the sentence, noticing that Evie had run out of the room to get new pencils. But those words were enough to confirm my suspicions. Cedric hadn't accepted the situation. He didn't repent or change his attitude toward me. He just temporarily submitted to the circumstances while he searched for a way to regain control, to get rid of the threat I posed to his career and reputation. I began to notice other troubling signs as well. Sometimes when picking Evie up, Cedric would ask her strange questions. Did Grandpa say anything about my job? What did you do today? What did you talk about? It was as if he was trying to find out if I was telling my granddaughter about his financial machinations, if I was preparing her as a witness against him. Temperance, always more sincere and open than her husband, had changed too. She became more tense, more cautious in talking to me, as if she were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Sometimes I caught her worried glances, as if she were trying to anticipate my actions or thoughts. By the end of the third month, our Sunday meetings had become a strange spectacle, where everyone played their part, but no one was sincere except Evie. She was the only one who truly enjoyed our meetings, not realizing the undercurrents and ulterior motives of the adults around her. One Wednesday night, about 3.5 months after our agreement, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors and was surprised to see Temperance and Evie on the doorstep. Both of them looked worried. Sorry for the late visit, Rivers, Temperance said, smiling nervously. Cedric's late at work, and I have an urgent meeting with a client. I was wondering if you could watch Evie for a couple hours. I'll pick her up before 9. Sure, I replied, delighted at the unexpected opportunity to spend time with my granddaughter. We'll find something to do, won't we, Evie? Evie nodded, but without her usual enthusiasm. She looked worried, and that was not like her. Temperance said a quick goodbye and left, promising to return as soon as possible. I walked Evie to her room and offered to draw or read, but she declined, saying she was tired and just wanted to watch cartoons on TV. I turned on the children's channel and went to the kitchen to make cocoa. When I returned with 2 cups, Evie was already dozing off on the couch. I gently covered her with a blanket and quietly left the room, leaving the door ajar so I could hear if she woke up. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening. I decided to mind my own business while Evie slept. I sat down at my computer to check my email when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw Cedric's car parked right under my balcony. Cedric and Temperance got out of the car. They were arguing heatedly about something, and then Temperance gestured toward my windows, and they both fell silent, looking around. I frowned. Temperance had said she had a meeting with a client. Why is she here with Cedric? And why aren't they coming up to my place to get Evie? They were standing right under my open window, and I could hear the scraps of their conversation. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but what I heard made me freeze in place. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Cedric, Temperance was saying. What if something goes wrong? Everything will be fine, Cedric replied irritably. It's the perfect plan. No one will suspect a thing. The old man fell in the bathtub and hit his head, a common occurrence at his age. I felt a chill run down my spine. They were talking about me, about my death. But what if he left a copy of the papers with his lawyer? Temperance asked. I checked, Cedric replied. He meets regularly with Mortimer Holt, his old friend. He must have the documents. But Holt won't do anything without a direct order from his father. And if Dad's gone... But it's murder, Cedric. Temperance's voice trembled. I can't be a part of it. Would you rather I go to prison? Cedric asked sharply. That we lose everything. The house, the money, the reputation. That Evie has to grow up knowing her father is a criminal? Is that better? Temperance was silent. I saw her lower her head as if she couldn't find an answer. I'm not asking you to participate, Cedric continued in a softer tone. Just give me an alibi for tomorrow night. Tell them we were at home together all night if they ask. That's all. And Evie, Temperance asked, what are we going to tell her? That Grandpa slipped in the bathtub. An accident. She's little. She'll forget quickly. Besides, we'll move right after this. I've already looked at a house in another town, far away from here. A new beginning for all of us. I stepped away from the window, feeling the world crumble around me. My own son was planning to kill me. Not just estrange me, not just cut off communication. Kill me. And he'd already planned it, worked out the details, made excuses. I went back to the room where Evie was sleeping. She looked like such an innocent, peacefully sleeping child. And her father was willing to take away her grandfather to protect his career and his reputation, to avoid responsibility for his crimes. I sat down in the chair across from the couch where Evie slept and stared at her for a long time, trying to decide what to do next. Could I just turn Cedric in to the police right now? Tell them about his plan? But what proof did I have? An overheard conversation that both of them would undoubtedly deny? Besides, that wouldn't solve the problem with the financial fraud paperwork. Cedric could still go on trial for his financial crimes. Maybe I should have gone into hiding, disappeared, started a new life somewhere far away from Rapid City. But that would mean losing Evie forever. And I wasn't sure that Cedric wouldn't find me if he really decided to follow through. The only option left was to get ahead of him, use the evidence I had and turn it over to the authorities before Cedric could carry out his plan. It would mean ruining my own son's life, possibly sending him to prison. But the choice was between his freedom and my life. And to be honest with myself, Cedric had already made that choice for both of us. The sound of the front door opening brought me out of my reverie. I'd forgotten to lock the door after Temperance had left. Now she was back to get Evie, and from the sound of footsteps, she wasn't alone. I stood up quickly and went out into the hallway. Cedric and Temperance were standing there, both clearly surprised to find me awake. "Oh, you're awake," Temperance said with feigned joy. "We're here for Evie." The client had canceled, and Cedric had finished work earlier than he'd planned. I looked at them, trying to keep a neutral expression on my face. They didn't know I'd heard their conversation. That was my only advantage, and I wasn't about to lose it. "Evie's asleep," I said quietly. She was tired and dozed off, watching cartoons. "Why don't you let her sleep over? I'll take her to school in the morning." Cedric and Temperance looked at each other. I saw something like irritation flicker in Cedric's eyes, but he got over it quickly. "No, that's impossible," he said firmly. "Evie has a test tomorrow, and she needs to study for it. Besides, all her school supplies are at home." "I understand," I nodded. "Then I'll wake her up." I went back into the room and gently shook Evie's shoulder. She opened her eyes, blinking sleepily. "Mommy and Daddy are here for you, sweetie," I said quietly. "It's time to go home." Evie nodded sleepily and sat up on the couch, rubbing her eyes. "I didn't finish my cocoa," she mumbled. "You will next time," I promised, helping her put on her jacket. "I'll make you a fresh one." When we walked out into the hallway, Evie was almost awake. She smiled at her parents and ran over to Temperance, hugging her legs. "Are we going home?" she asked. "Yes, sweetie," Temperance replied, stroking her head. "It's time to sleep in your crib." I stood to the side, watching this family scene. Cedric didn't look at me, his eyes only on his daughter, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, in the way he held his hands, too stiff, as if he were afraid of making the wrong move. "Evie, say thank you and goodbye to Grandpa," Temperance said. Evie ran over to me and hugged me. I squatted down to be level with her and hugged her back tightly. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said. Goodbye. Will I see you on Sunday?" I looked at her trusting eyes so much like Allison's, and felt my heart clench. If Cedric's plan worked, this could be our last time together. "Of course, sweetheart," I answered, trying to make my voice sound normal. "I'll be waiting for you." I kissed her forehead and let her go. Evie ran to the door where her parents were already standing. "See you Sunday," I said, looking straight at Cedric. He met my gaze and quickly averted his eyes. "Until Sunday," he muttered, hurrying out the door. Temperance lingered for a second, giving me a strange look, a mixture of guilt, fear, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then she walked out too, and the door closed behind them. I was left alone in the empty apartment. There were 2 cups of unfinished cocoa on the coffee table, mine and Evie's. There was a plaid on the couch, crumpled where Evie had slept. There was a pencil on the floor, which she must have dropped when she dozed off. I sank slowly into the chair, feeling the realization of what had happened come over me. My own son had planned my death. The man I'd raised, the man I'd given my home, a part of my life to, wanted to kill me to protect his money and reputation. It was too much for one night, too much betrayal, too much pain. I could feel my hands shaking, my heart beating too fast, nausea rising to my throat. But I couldn't let myself go soft, not now, not when my life was at stake. I didn't have much time left. Cedric had told Temperance he was going to carry out his plan tomorrow night. That meant I only had one day to get ahead of him. I got up from my chair and walked over to the window. It was already dark outside, the streetlights illuminating the deserted road. Cedric's car was long gone. I closed the window and drew the curtains, then walked around the apartment, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. Today I was still safe, but tomorrow... I sat down at my computer and opened the folder where I kept copies of the documents that had compromised Cedric. All the files were there: letters, reports, bank statements, irrefutable evidence of his financial shenanigans. I made another copy on a flash drive in case something happened to my computer. Then I wrote a detailed letter explaining the nature of Cedric's crimes, attached all the evidence, and saved the letter in my email drafts. Tomorrow I'll send it to the prosecutor's office, and perhaps a copy to Mortimer Holt for extra insurance. But first I needed to secure myself for the night. I didn't think Cedric would risk acting earlier than planned, but precaution couldn't hurt. I checked all the windows and doors again, then pushed a heavy dresser against the front door. Not the most secure barricade, but enough for me to hear if someone tried to enter. Then I called Mortimer and made an appointment for 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. I didn't bother to explain the reason over the phone, just said it was urgent and important. Mortimer, hearing the alarm in my voice, agreed without further question. Tomorrow I'll tell him everything about Cedric's plan to kill me, about what I overheard. Mortimer will help me defend myself legally and perhaps advise me on the best way to get the documents to the authorities. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My thoughts revolved around Cedric, Evie, Temperance, everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. I thought about Allison, about what she would say if she knew what it had come to. She had always believed in Cedric, always defended him, even when I noticed troubling traits in him. "He's just looking for himself, Rivers," she'd say. "Give him time and he'll become a good man." But time showed that Cedric had chosen a different path, a path that led him into financial crimes and plans to kill his own father. Allison would be devastated if she found out. I turned on my side, looking at the picture of Allison on my bedside table. Her smile, captured in the photo years ago, seemed distant now, like a star from another galaxy. How I missed her, her wisdom, her ability to see the good in even the darkest of situations. But now I had to make it on my own. Make a decision that would protect me and maybe save Evie from being raised by a father capable of murder. It was a heavy burden, but I knew I had to carry it. I closed my eyes, trying to find peace, if only for a few hours. Tomorrow would be a crucial day, and I would need all my strength and clarity of mind. I must get ahead of Cedric before he can carry out his plan. I must protect myself and secure a future for Evie, even if it means sending her father to jail. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I knew there was no other choice. The truce had turned out to be fake, and so had Cedric's remorse. Now I had to act decisively and without hesitation to protect the most precious thing I had left, my life and my granddaughter. The morning began with the shrill ringing of the alarm clock. I opened my eyes, feeling hardly rested overnight. The restless dreams in which I heard Cedric and Temperance talking over and over again brought no relief. But despite my fatigue, my thoughts were clear. The plan of action I'd thought of last night before I'd gone to bed seemed like the only true solution. After a quick breakfast, I called Mortimer and arranged to meet him an hour early. My old friend heard the anxiety in my voice and didn't ask any questions. At 10 in the morning, I was already sitting in Mortimer Holt's office. His office was located in an old building in the center of Rapid City and kept the atmosphere of the last century. Massive wooden furniture, walls filled with bookcases with legal literature, heavy curtains on the windows. "So, Rivers," Mortimer folded his hands on the desk, looking at me over his glasses. "You look worried. What happened?" I told him everything about the conversation I'd overheard, about Cedric's plan to get rid of me, about how I'd spent a sleepless night wondering what to do next. Mortimer listened without interrupting, only occasionally frowning or nodding. When I finished, he took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. "This is more serious than I thought," he said finally. "Your son isn't just a crook, he's ready to kill. We need to act now." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. Now that I had shared my secret with Mortimer, Now that the decision had been made, I felt a little lighter on my shoulders. Here's what I propose, Mortimer continued. First, we'll anonymously send some of the evidence of Cedric's financial machinations to the appropriate authorities, the Financial Commission and the IRSum. Not all of it, just enough to start an investigation. Second, I'll prepare documents that will provide you with a legal defense. A letter detailing the situation and Cedric's threats will be kept in my safe, with instructions to turn it over to the authorities in the event of, well, in case anything happens to you. One more thing, I added. I want to set up a trust fund for Evie. The money Cedric paid me back for the house, I want it to go towards her education and future. But so that neither Cedric nor Temperance can access it, Mortimer agreed to help with the trust fund, and we spent the next 2 hours working out the details. An anonymous letter for the Finance Commission was drafted, with enough evidence attached to initiate an investigation, but without revealing all the cards. We then prepared the paperwork to set up a trust fund for Evie, with clear terms that would secure her future. I spent the next 3 days barely leaving the house. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was Mortimer. "Rivers," he said without preamble. "It's started. The Finance Commission has launched an investigation into the company where Cedric works. They came to the office this morning." I felt my heart beat faster. How long before Cedric finds out? If it hasn't already, it will be very soon. News like this travels fast. Be careful, Rivers. The doorbell rang around 3 in the afternoon. Through the peephole, I saw Cedric, pale, his hair disheveled. I didn't open the door, but I turned on the intercom. "Cedric," I said calmly, "to what do I owe the honor?" "Open the door, Father." Cedric's voice sounded tense. "We need to talk." "About what?" "Not over the speaker," he snapped. "Open the damn door." "I'm sorry, son, but I can't do that," I said firmly, "especially after I heard you talking to Temperance about how you plan to give me an accident." Cedric froze, his face contorted with shock. You've got it all wrong," he muttered. "We weren't talking about you." "Enough lies," I said tiredly. "I've heard enough to know your intentions. And as you can see, I've taken precautions. The Finance Commission has already started an investigation, hasn't it? That's why you're here." Cedric's face contorted with rage. "It was you," he shouted. "You sent them the documents. After all I've done for you, and this is how you repay me? You only did all this because I blackmailed you, Cedric. Not out of love or respect. And you were planning to kill me. What was I supposed to do?" "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I swear you will." With that, he turned and walked away. A week later, Temperance called me. Her voice sounded tense and frightened. "Rivers," she said without preamble, "Cedric has been suspended. The investigation is in full swing, and he's facing serious charges. He's not himself. He sits in his office all day, drinking and muttering about revenge. I'm scared for Evie and for me." "Where are you now?" I asked with concern. "At home, with Evie. Cedric left an hour ago without saying where. I'm afraid he might do something dangerous." "Pack the most necessary things for you and Evie and get out of there," I said firmly. "You can go to your parents' house or to a hotel, anywhere where Cedric won't find you." 2 days later, I decided to drive to Cedric's house to make sure Temperance and Evie were safe. As I drove up, I noticed that the front door was ajar. I cautiously stepped inside. The house looked as if the owners had left in a hurry. "Is anyone there?" I called out. "Temperance? Evie?" There was a low rustle from the kitchen. I went there and saw Temperance and Evie sitting at the kitchen table. There were 2 suitcases on the floor. "Temperance?" I called out softly. She flinched and raised her head. Her eyes were red with tears. "Rivers," she said with relief. "I'm so glad it's you." Evie, hearing my voice, rushed to me with a cry of joy. "Grandpa!" I took her in my arms and hugged her tightly. "What's going on?" I asked. "Why are you still here?" Temperance sighed. "We were going to leave like you advised. But then Cedric came back, and he was furious, screaming, accusing me of betrayal, threatening to take Evie away if I left. I was frightened and decided to wait for him to calm down. He left again this morning, said he had to make things right. And now, we're waiting for the right time to leave." "You can't stay here," I said firmly. "Cedric is unstable. You must leave now." Temperance nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry, Rivers. I should have known." should have suspected something, but I kept my eyes closed because it was easier to pretend everything was okay. Evie lifted her head and looked at us puzzled. "Where's Daddy?" she asked. "Why do we have to leave?" "Your daddy," Helman. I started gently. "Your daddy did something wrong at work and now he's in trouble. He's very upset and angry, so you and your mom should go live somewhere else until things get better." Evie frowned. "Like that time Dad yelled at you at my birthday party?" I nodded, surprised by her insight. "Yeah, honey, something like that. Sometimes adults make mistakes, say and do things they regret later. But it's important to remember that we still love each other, even when we're angry." We were on our way out when we heard the sound of a car pulling up. "It's Cedric," Temperance whispered. I recognized the sound of his car. I quickly handed Evie to Temperance. "Dash, go to the kitchen and stay there. I'll talk to him." Cedric walked into the house. His clothes smelled of alcohol and his speech was slightly slurred. "What are you doing here?" he growled. "This is my house." "I came to make sure Temperance and Evie were safe," I answered calmly. "You've ruined everything," he hissed. "Dash, my whole life, everything I've built. I was fired today." "Me? And it's all because of you." "You ruined your life, Cedric," I said firmly. "When you decided to cheat clients, manipulate stocks, when you planned to kill your own father. I only did what I had to do to protect myself and Evie." That's when we heard the sound of sirens approaching the house. Through the window, I saw 3 police cars pull up to the curb. Cedric turned pale. "What's going on? Did you call the police?" Temperance and Evie came out of the kitchen, attracted by the sound of sirens. Evie, seeing her father, exclaimed joyfully and ran toward him, but Temperance held her back. "Not now, sweetheart. Daddy needs to talk to these people." There was a knock at the door. "Rapid City Police. Open the door." Cedric gave me one last look, a mixture of hatred, fear, and maybe, somewhere deep down, the realization that he'd brought the situation to this point himself. Then he slowly opened the door. 4 policemen entered the house. One of them, the senior one, stepped forward. "Cedric Price, you are under arrest on charges of financial fraud, stock manipulation, and tax offenses." While the officer read out his driver's license, another policeman handcuffed Cedric. Evie began to cry, not realizing what was happening, and Temperance hugged her tightly. I stood back, watching my son being led out of the house in handcuffs. I expected to feel satisfaction or relief, but instead I felt only deep fatigue and sadness. When the police took Cedric outside, I walked over to Evie, who was still crying, and sat down in front of her. "Grandpa," she sobbed. "Where are they taking Daddy? Why is he wearing those shiny bracelets?" I sighed, trying to find words that a 6-year-old could understand. "Your daddy did something wrong, sweetie," I said softly, "and now he needs to go with these people to explain everything. It's like taking someone else's toy without permission. You'd have to apologize and give it back, wouldn't you?" Evie nodded, sniffling. "But Daddy's coming back?" I glanced over at Temperance, her eyes realizing the gravity of the situation. "We don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "But no matter what happens, you'll always have me and Grandpa. We'll take care of you and love you, no matter what happens." I hugged Evie, looking out the window where Cedric was being put into the police car. The man I had once held in my arms, taught to ride a bike, hoped to see happy and successful, was now driving away in handcuffs, probably for years to come. Justice had been served, but I felt no joy, only fatigue and the realization that sometimes you have to make the hardest decisions. Perhaps Evie would understand that someday. Perhaps Cedric would too. In the meantime, I'll be there for those who need me, doing my best to fix what can still be fixed. The police car with Cedric disappeared around the corner. One chapter of our family history had ended, but for Evie, for Temperance, and for me, a new one was beginning. And as bitter as this page was, I was determined to make the next one brighter.